we went from a world in which the internet had suddenly become universal and yet was still sort of latent, to a world in which now everybody has been forced to try everything online.
Welcome to Fast Forward, where we're speaking to some big picture thinkers about the impact of the pandemic on UK businesses to help our customers plan for the future. I've been speaking with the analyst Benedict Evans, who is very well known for his annual tech presentation and his weekly newsletters covering opinion and analysis on the global tech and media landscape. I started by asking him what the next phase of the pandemic might look like.
I think we're going through multiple phases of dealing with COVID and lockdown. There was a period a few months ago when everyone jumped into the foxhole and tried to work out what was going on. And we work out that actually everyone has broadband, everyone has a computer with a camera. Actually, we can get on with business at home. And so there's that moment where you think, okay, hang on, can we just continue? Can we stay alive, so to speak, in lockdown? There's a second phase where you think, well, hang on, we're not going to be here for a month. We're going to be here for 6 months. And we're not going to get to anything that resembles normal until next year, and probably not January next year either. So we actually need to do business here. And so I think it's been kind of interesting to see sort of waves in particular of conferences, first postponing and then saying, okay, no, we're going to have to go to digital because we don't know what postponing means. And I think you're now, over the summer, seeing a lot of companies saying, well, we're just going to have to do some business while we're still all working from home. I think there's a sort of a third phase as we slowly emerge from this and move back to, is now a cliched phrase, a new normal. But we're not really into that yet. We don't know what that kind of transition back to not worrying about masks and airplanes will look like. And then at the end of that period, we're in some new world. We don't really know what that new world is. There was a period again a few months ago where it felt like everyone had picked up their own favorite topic and said, COVID is why I was right about this thing that I wrote 2 years ago. Well, whatever the topic was, suddenly COVID proved that you were right, whether, inequality or cars or solar or, geopolitics or the EU, anything, whatever your topic was, COVID proved you were right. Certainly crises sort of have that effect, and crises, much more broadly than, e-commerce adoption, crises tend to reset things. And so we are going to have, clearly sort of a bunch of geopolitical change around, the US election and the role of China. There's going to be a bunch of cultural change in, even sort of simple things like what does fashion look like and what does music look like. There's going to be a bunch of kind of business and economic changes and fiscal changes and kind of consumer expectation changes. We've gone from a world, we went from a world in which the internet had suddenly become universal and yet was still sort of latent, to a world in which now everybody has been forced to try everything online.
How are businesses going to be disrupted in the long term?
So people in technology talk a lot about disruption, and everything is probably disruptive to somebody, but for everyone else, it just kind of changes the business environment, and it's a threat and an opportunity and a reason to rethink how you do business. So for example, buying tickets online was hugely disruptive to the travel agent business. It didn't really disrupt aircraft or airlines. It just kind of changed how the airline business worked. And the same thing for hotels, the same thing for, say, restaurants. Booking online reviews didn't mean that somehow internet companies competed with restaurants, but it just kind of changed how the business worked. And so I think the primary thing would be just to presume that a lot of the customer journey around how they come to you will change. There may be new people, new competitors trying to change what the product is or take advantage of that new channel in order to compete with you in new ways. It doesn't follow that the underlying product will necessarily change. Buying plane tickets changed completely, and the way we think about foreign holidays changed completely. Airplanes are still airplanes, and the basic economics of running an airline haven't changed. The way that you get customers has changed. The way that your brand operates has changed. And I think that's there's a small number of companies, as I said, that will discover that Amazon has done to them what what it did to Barnes and Noble. I think there's many more companies which might look more like Procter and Gamble, in that, it's not that they're not particularly worried about Amazon replacing all of their own brands any more than they worried about Tesco competing with all of their own brands. What they do think about is, well, when we sell on Amazon, that's not the same as selling in Tesco or Walmart. And the customer journey is different, and the buying decisions are different, and the negotiating process is different. And so we just have to flex and negotiate and adapt to this new kind of marketing and new customer journey. In exactly the same way that they adapted to Walmart and they adapted to department stores and they adapted to supermarkets.
What new strategies should businesses be considering?
So there's this great quote from Jim Barksdale, who is the co-founder of Netscape, that there's two ways to make money in business: bundling and unbundling. And if you think about like the last 100 years of retail, we've kind of had that process going back and forth multiple times, from kind of supermarkets to boutiques to department stores, and over and over, back and forth. And the same thing happens in technology. And this is a large part of what the internet does, because a newspaper is a bundle, a retailer is a bundle, a shopping mall or a shopping street is a bundle, a CD is a bundle. And when you change what the distribution channel is, you change what bundles and what aggregation becomes possible, and you create new routes to market, and it becomes possible to do new bundles or to unbundle in new ways. And so if you look, for example, at what's going on in financial services in the UK, I can probably point to three examples. So the first one of these would be TransferWise, which is an international money transfer service. And they don't need to be part of your bank to do that. They don't have to be part of Lloyds or Halifax or Citibank or whoever it is. They can create that as a separate company and go direct to customers. So they can unbundle this quite small but massively overpriced business that's buried deep inside big commercial banks, and do it much better and do it at a much better price. And it's very hard for those organizations to react to that. The second example would be something like Monzo or Revolut, which is many ways a fairly straightforward consumer banking product, but they don't need high street retail. So the customer acquisition process looks completely different, and they can get to millions of customers in a completely different way. They don't need to have hundreds of stores across the country in order to get to that customer base. Now, they have to spend that money on something else. They have to spend that money on customer acquisition or on ads, or in other places. There's no free lunch. But they don't need the retail estate that they would have needed in the past. The third example is as a kind of a company in the UK called Counting Up, which is a business, an SME bank account that includes accounting and CRM and sort of business process management. So your bank account tells you when the invoice has been paid and generates your tax return. And again, those would have been three completely separate companies and three different pieces of software. And you'd have to get the accounting software, and you'd have to get the inventory software, and you laboriously plug them into each other, and maybe you download CSVs and import them from one to the other. But when you're online and you're in software and you're all in new software, it becomes very easy to think kind of orthogonally about what kind of proposition you might package together and how you might bundle that in a different way. And I think those are sort of ways of thinking about what becomes possible, because the money itself, as we all know, is a commodity you make somewhere else. You make the money somewhere else. But the question is, what package of propositions can you build around that? And how does that change if you don't have a shop? And how does that change if you don't have kind of 40 or 50 years accumulated software stovepipe together?
How has the public's attitude to technology changed?
Well, I think there's a moment of realization here in many ways. I mean, you can see that very obviously in video, that we all had high quality video cameras and video conferencing software, but outside of Google and a few other places, no one used it. You were going to go and meet that person on the other side of London. It would never have occurred to you to do a video call, and now it has to be a video call. And so when we all get back to normal, whatever that means, will it be still be a video call, or will you still get in the tube in July and spend 45 minutes going across town to go and meet that person? And I think there's an awful lot of sort of moments where we sort of suddenly woke up and realized, hang on a second, we are all online now, and we all have internet connected pocket supercomputers, and we are all ready and willing and able to do anything online now.
Check out Benedict's website for his latest tech presentation, which builds on some of these ideas. The critical thing for me is that while in some categories the fundamentals won't change, all businesses should be thinking that their routes to market will change significantly. This is something we look at in some detail in a piece of research called Decoding Decisions, which you can find with our other research and analysis on Think with Google UK.